Today I'll be talking about weaving code and art together. My name is Spencer Magnusson. I am a pipeline engineer at DreamWorks. I've been a Blender enthusiast for over 15 years now, and I've been making add-ons for Blender since 2018. But last year I decided to change that. Because you see, inside of me are two wolves. There's the developer side that wants to code and solve problems, but the other side is the visual side that wants to tell stories. And I've always kind of had to pick and choose between them and felt like they couldn't ever work together. The question always comes to, which one do I feed? And the answer is, why not both? So I decided to set some goals last year. Firstly, to make more art. I set a goal to make sure I made several artworks per quarter to keep myself consistent. And second, to use coding to complement or improve my art. And that could come in the form of add-ons, whether my own or others, node trees, because nodes are basically a higher form of programming, and just simply Python scripts when I need it. And this is to all answer the question, can I do both? Can I do both coding and art together, or can it just remain parallel? The first art piece I started with is called The Hospital Morning. This was based on an experience I had, and I wanted to give it the kind of feeling of what a memory feels like, and I felt a traditional painting style met that. And so in this case, what you're looking at is not a filter over a CG render. It's not even a 3D scene where the textures are paintbrushes in of themselves, but it's actually a CG canvas projected onto an existing 3D scene and then brushstrokes instanced on top of that. So how did I go about that? Firstly, I used a Python script to bake the render into a vertex color attribute. So in this case, what you're seeing is the canvas with a render basically projected onto the mesh as a color attribute, which you can vertex paint. Next, I created a Python script to generate a flow map. And what I mean about flow map is it essentially tells Blender what orientation or rotation the brushstroke should be for that given area. Next, I use geometry nodes to instance brushstrokes onto this canvas, taking that color and flow map attributes to color and orient the brushstrokes. And finally, I just rendered it in Eevee. Now, the benefits of this is that since the brushstrokes actually exist in 3D space, they could actually billboard and follow the camera. I hadn't gotten to test the animation side of it just yet, but it does have a temporal consistency, which is great. And for the colors, I can be able to just simply control the colors and edge fall off by simply vertex painting or even just deleting or moving parts of the mesh. And then finally, I get the accuracy of cycles with a cycles bake. That's what the color is coming from. And the speed of Eevee, since I'm just rendering the scene directly in Eevee with very simple shader-based lighting. And overall, this taught me, or at least reminded me of how, with an artist's workflow, you can very much experiment and try new things and find ways to improve your workflow and see what works. Once I implemented coding, it forced me to commit to the workflow, but also helped me find ways to make it faster, and while it did have some overhead, allowed me to speed up my process or help me focus on the creative parts of the workflow. Next, I went back to add-ons and worked on a more visual add-on called Light Painter. Any 2D artists out there? Let me know in the comments. Light Painter reminded me of how with 2D art you can just paint where you want the light to be. You don't have to care about calculating the position in 3D space or using the inverse square law to determine the optimal distance and fall off your lights. You just paint it on there and that's it. And Light Painter was my way of trying to bring that into the 3D space so that you could paint where you wanted the light to be and it would position the light for you. So as you can see here, it supports mesh lamps as well as lamp objects. And then I went down a rabbit hole of implementing it for sky textures and sun lamps, which was very fun to see it in an environment lighting setup. And then also I went down another rabbit hole after seeing a video from Ian Hubert on using flags or meshes to cast shadows on your scene. In this case, it's to implement the feeling of clouds on your scene without actually having to render out clouds. So Escape was was ambition getting the best of me, and I wanted to make an animated short. Now, unfortunately, I had very little time. I knew I had to finish this project within 8 to 9 months, and so I had to keep it as simple and small in scope as possible. First, I'll let it speak for itself. I'll premiere it right here, and you can watch it first.
911 dispatcher of Space Quadrant 211 with your
emergency. We need to evacuate, ma'am! The ground is shaking! It's not stable here!
That doesn't justify a full evacuation. Sorry.
Riots have broken out throughout the city and businesses have been ransacked.
Open the door! Open the door!
Spreading at an alarming rate.
So let me go over the process of how I was able to finish this project within 8 to 9 months. Firstly, I did a lot of planning and organizing. I wrote a screenplay. I created a shot list of all the shots that I needed for the animation. I created a blend file for each shot and made some basic animations with some car primitives add-on that I bought on Blender Market. And I linked these shots together in the Blender video editor, and it basically gave me a rough edit. I could see it live, I could reload files and see those live in the video editor, and it gave me a rough edit to be able to remove or add shots or change their length. Next was the animation process, and I was not experienced in animating, and so I had some help with add-ons and nodes. Firstly, the launch control add-on. That's not sponsored by me, that's just Daniel Vesterbeck's add-on that I really like. It allowed quick automatic rigging of the car as well as some physics simulation on top of my animation. And then next, with Blender 3.6 coming out, simulation nodes had come out as well, and so I decided to try that with the bursting through the lava. Although I could have done it with a fluid simulation, I liked the granular control of the lava simulation, and it kind of lent itself to the low polygon 90s look. Another add-on that helped me a lot was one of my own, which is a free add-on. By the way, Light Painter is a free add-on of mine that you can get to. I'll get to that later. But basically, blend allows me to configure and run quality checks on my blend files. So with Escape, I was able to say, okay, for all these files, I want this to be a specific render output folder, scene resolution, ensure that the camera's depth of field is on. But it allows me to do automatic updates on each of these files, so I can change and configure the rule, click a button, and it will update all my files without me having to manually go into each one. But overall, I was very proud of the results, which ended up being 6 hero assets, 31 shots, all edited down to a 2-minute video, and about 8 to 9 months of work. And I credit all that to the workflow. But a smooth workflow is something anyone can do. That if you find yourself tweaking the same settings, make a simple add-on panel that puts all those settings in one place. Or if you find yourself clicking the same buttons over and over again, add those to your quick favorites. Or if there's objects that you find yourself reusing, put those in the asset browser that's already included with Blender. All these ways can help you smooth and automate your workflow, not necessarily just to save time, but to allow you to focus on the creativity more and not as much the overhead. Now, for some of you, you're probably wondering of why the tight deadline, because some of the Blender artists, the animators out there, work years on their animated short films, even their first animated short. Now, for me, it was that I was planning to meet a girl, and she even came a few days early. And with the project fully done before she arrived, I was able to focus just on her. But with that, I knew I had to make smaller projects after that, so that way I didn't get as caught up into it. So my next one, I went into kind of a cuter, cozier vibe with an animation called Ghost Camping. I'll have it play really quick. There's a few add-ons I used with this one, including Ant Landscape for the mountains, Physical Starlight and Atmosphere for the sky, Geometry Nodes to instance the trees and grass. And another one, which is one of my add-ons, is InView. Now, InView, to put simply, just allows you to detect which objects are directly visible or even indirectly visible in your scene, and gives you the options to hide them, or mask the geometry, or simply just have them selected so you can do something else specific with them. But in this case, it allowed me to optimize where the trees and grass were placed so they were only where they would be visible, and therefore more optimized for the viewport and eventually the render. Next is Summer Project. This is kind of the culmination of, I'll let it play out right now. This one I also used several add-ons, Ant Landscape, Car Primitives for the truck, which I added onto afterward, Light Painter to direct the rim lighting on the truck, InView as well, and then another one of my add-ons, which is a free one, is Scene Complexity. To extend on the Blender statistics where you can see the total geometry count in your scene, I had this add-on breakdown per object, so I can be able to see, oh, this landscape in the background has quite a lot of triangles and is using higher texture size than anything in my foreground. Maybe I should lower the resolution on that to save some memory and render time. So that was my year of coding and making art. As I reflected on it and got to talk to others about it, there were some common questions that I got that I wanted to make sure I answered here. Firstly, as a digital artist, should I learn to code? Do I need to learn all of this as a digital artist? My answer is it's optional. I truly believe that. I think it's optional for any artist, but I believe that it can only improve your workflow, and that by improving your workflow, you can find ways to focus more on your art instead of just the overhead. Nextly, should I use add-ons? My answer is if your current solution is painful, if there's any tedium or just slowness to your workflow, you should always look for options. You should always see if there's an add-on or assets or something else to streamline your workflow, because there almost always is within the Blender ecosystem. Next, which add-on should I use? Usually is the next question. Now, I mentioned some of my personal add-ons, but I'd first recommend just using the add-ons that are already included in Blender and are free to use. And then lastly, can I do both? Can I do both the art and coding? Is there a way of putting them together, or should I just kind of leave them at arm's length of each other? Now, you'll kind of notice that sometimes, or at least most of the time, during these projects, it never felt like I was doing both in equilibrium, that I was able to, that it kind of just felt like more like spinning plates, where I was going to the art side, stabilizing it and spinning it, and then realizing, oh, the coding side is kind of toppling. I need to go back to that and stabilize that one. And like with most things, there was never a time where I felt like they could just both be perfect, perfectly stable. And that's part of life, that's part of the art process, is you focus on the present, you focus on the priorities that you have immediately, and it allows me to not just have them perfectly stable, but kind of go back and forth, coding and art, and eventually weave them together into something unique, something different. So thank you. I appreciate you coming to this virtual talk. The QR code will get you all the ways to follow me on social media, but more importantly, all the free add-ons that I mentioned, like Light Painter, B-Lint, and Scene Complexity, those are all free to use. You can get those through the QR code. For those of you interested in making add-ons, I hosted a workshop at the Blender conference. I'll try to recreate that virtually to upload here. But otherwise, thank you for watching, and happy blending.